Later that same afternoon, while my wife was sipping cocktails at what she called a work conference, I watched every dollar we'd saved for 22 years light up my screen, and then disappear. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't chase her. I typed 7 calm words and hit send, already knowing this story would end very differently than she planned. Before I tell you exactly how it unfolded, and how one careless move exposed far more than a broken marriage, do me a small favor. If stories about betrayal, consequences, and quiet turning points resonate with you, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach people who need them more than they realize. My name is Evan Cross, I'm 46 years old, and I work as a senior financial systems architect for a regional credit consortium based in Haven Ridge, North Carolina. On that Wednesday morning, I was seated at my desk reviewing anomaly reports for a municipal client when my phone vibrated. Once. Then again. The message preview made my stomach tighten. I want a divorce. I've met someone who actually makes me happy. No greeting. No explanation. Just a declaration. I assumed there would be another message, some attempt at justification, maybe even guilt. Instead, my banking app sent an alert. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. I opened the dashboard I'd built years ago, a consolidated monitoring system that tracked every account tied to my name, my wife's name, or both. The numbers were moving. Retirement account, transfer initiated. Long-term investment fund, liquidation request. Emergency reserve, full withdrawal. My wife, Lydia Cross, was supposed to be in San Marcos, California, attending a 3-day branding summit for her marketing firm. That's what she told me when she packed her suitcase Monday night. She kissed my cheek, joked about bad hotel coffee, and asked, casually, how long it would take to access our retirement funds if we ever needed them in an emergency. At the time, I hadn't thought twice. Now I watched as 6 figures attempted to leave accounts protected by dual authorization protocols, regulatory thresholds, and automated compliance systems I'd personally helped design. Then her second message arrived. I transferred the retirement funds to my private account. You can keep the house. I don't need it anymore. I set my coffee down, opened the audit log, and saw exactly what she hadn't anticipated. The system didn't care that we were married. It didn't care about emotion, justification, or timing. It saw a high-risk pattern, protected funds being moved unilaterally, rapidly, and without the required joint authentication. That combination triggered automatic safeguards tied to federal financial regulations. At 11:42 a.m., every transfer was flagged. At 11:43 a.m., the receiving accounts were frozen. At 11:44 a.m., a compliance review was initiated. I replied to Lydia with exactly what I felt in that moment. I hope you're happy. Nothing more. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. What I felt was clarity. We'd been married since we were 24. High school sweethearts from Briarfield, a town small enough that everyone knew who paid their bills on time and who didn't. I was always the careful one. The planner. The spreadsheet person. Lydia was magnetic, confident, persuasive, brilliant at selling ideas and herself. It worked for a long time. I handled the numbers. She handled people. Or so I thought. Over the past 6 months, the cracks had appeared quietly. She stopped asking about our future projections. Stopped sitting with me during our annual financial reviews. Opened a new credit card without mentioning it. Made comments about the guest room being unnecessary clutter. Said things like, "You're too obsessed with safety. Life is meant to be lived." I assumed it was midlife restlessness. I assumed wrong. While I built systems designed to detect fraud for a living, Lydia had been studying how those systems worked, not to protect anything, but to find ways around what she believed were blind spots. What she didn't understand was that the system had no blind spots. It had patterns. And she fit one perfectly. By noon, my phone started buzzing, not with messages from her, but from compliance officers at the receiving bank. Account access temporarily restricted. Review pending. Timeline, 5 to 7 business days, possibly longer if irregularities were confirmed. That's when Lydia's plan began collapsing. The call came 2 days later. "Evan," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "My card isn't working." "What's the balance?" I asked. "Zero," she snapped. "How is it zero? I transferred everything." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the live dashboard. "The system flagged the transfers," I said evenly. "Protected accounts require dual authorization. Federal review is mandatory." Silence. "How long?" she whispered. 5 to 7 business days, I replied. "Could be longer." She hung up without another word. I sat there long after the call ended, not angry, not heartbroken, just aware that the life I thought I was living had already ended days ago. The text hadn't destroyed my marriage. It had only revealed what had been quietly dismantled behind my back. And that was when I realized something far more unsettling than a divorce was unfolding, because Lydia hadn't just tried to leave me. She'd tried to erase me. And the systems I trusted were about to uncover just how much damage she'd been doing long before that message ever reached my phone. By Friday morning, the silence from Lydia was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I went to work like nothing had changed, reviewed anomaly reports, approved compliance escalations, and joined a late morning call with a municipal credit board discussing suspicious fund movements in a neighboring county. The irony sat quietly in the back of my mind, not sharp enough yet to hurt. At 11:17 a.m., my personal dashboard refreshed. 3 new alerts. Lydia had attempted to open 2 new credit cards using our shared address and 1 using her sister's. All 3 applications were automatically denied due to the active fraud review tied to her identity. The system flagged the behavior as financial distress escalation. That phrase stuck with me. Not desperation. Distress. A measurable pattern of panic. My phone rang less than a minute later. "You need to fix this," Lydia said, her voice stripped of its earlier confidence. "I can't access anything. Not the cards, not the account. I'm stranded." "Where?" I asked. A pause. "Phoenix." I closed my eyes slowly. "You said Dallas. It's complicated." "Is the conference complicated too?" I asked. "Because your company's HR department just called asking if you were actually registered." She didn't answer. The call ended abruptly, and I sat there staring at the ceiling of my office, realizing that the woman I'd spent over 2 decades trusting wasn't just leaving me, she was unraveling. By Monday, the situation had escalated beyond our marriage. A compliance officer from Mid-Atlantic Financial Trust requested a direct call. His tone was formal, cautious. "Mr. Cross, during the review of the attempted transfers, we identified patterns consistent with broader financial irregularities. We need to ask, did your wife have access to any corporate financial systems through your employment?" "No," I said immediately. "But she works in marketing. Expense accounts. Budget approvals." There was a brief silence on the line. "That aligns with what we're seeing." They didn't say more, but I knew what that meant. The system wasn't just flagging my accounts anymore. It was connecting dots. That afternoon, Caleb Norton, Lydia's supervisor at Strata Brand Solutions, called me directly. "I'm sorry to ask this," he said carefully, "but was Lydia actually attending a conference last week?" "I don't believe so," I replied. He exhaled sharply. "We've uncovered discrepancies in her expense reports going back 18 months. Large reimbursements tied to vendors that don't exist. Transfers routed through shell consulting accounts." My stomach tightened. "This isn't just an HR issue anymore," Caleb continued. "Our auditors are escalating it. If federal regulators get involved." "They will," I said quietly. "They always do." That night, I finally sat down in the living room of the house Lydia said she didn't want anymore. The house we'd renovated together. The house she thought she could casually discard after stripping it of its financial value. I opened the full archive of my monitoring system. Historical patterns. Behavioral timelines. The data told a story no one wanted to hear. Lydia hadn't just attempted to empty our retirement accounts. She'd been siphoning smaller amounts for months. Not from me, but from her employer. Marketing budgets. Vendor payments. Travel reimbursements routed through accounts she controlled. And she wasn't alone. A name appeared repeatedly in the transaction trails: Marcus Hale, Senior Operations Director at Strata Brand. Transfers bouncing between departments. Inflated invoices. Coordinated timing. This wasn't impulse. It was a system. Tuesday morning, federal compliance investigators arrived at my office. 2 of them. Calm. Precise. Polite. "Mr. Cross," one of them said, "we believe your personal financial safeguards triggered a much larger investigation. We'd like your cooperation." I gave them everything. Audit logs. System architecture. Behavioral flags. The automated thresholds that triggered Lydia's initial freeze. The same thresholds now exposing a corporate embezzlement scheme exceeding $2 million across multiple clients. "Did you suspect your wife?" the investigator asked. "No," I said honestly. I trusted her. He nodded. "That's usually how this starts." By Wednesday, Lydia's lawyer filed an emergency motion accusing me of deliberate financial sabotage. The claim argued that I had weaponized my expertise to trap her. My attorney, Grant Holloway, didn't even flinch when he read it. "This is a losing argument," he said. "Automated systems don't have intent. They have rules." The emergency hearing lasted 15 minutes. The judge reviewed the compliance documentation, noted that all freezes were automated and federally mandated, and denied Lydia's request for immediate access to funds. She was granted temporary use of the remaining joint checking balance, $3,000. That was it. Outside the courthouse, Lydia tried to speak to me. "Evan, please," she whispered. "This got out of hand." "You emptied our retirement accounts from a hotel room," I replied calmly. "Then lied about where you were." "I needed freedom," she said. "I needed to start over. And you decided to take everything with you." She looked away. 2 days later, the arrests began. Marcus Hale was detained at Stratabrand's headquarters. 2 other executives followed. Federal wire fraud charges. Conspiracy. Embezzlement. Asset concealment. Lydia was picked up that evening at a friend's apartment in Phoenix. She texted me from a restricted number hours later. "They say it's federal. They say prison." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "You didn't mean to stop," I wrote. "You just didn't expect to be seen." She didn't respond. Over the next week, investigators combed through everything. Phones. Laptops. External drives. They found spreadsheets Lydia had kept, painstakingly organized. Property valuations. Target addresses. 12 families listed. Our house included. She'd planned to buy it through a proxy at its original purchase price, flip it, and vanish. The realization hit harder than the divorce. She hadn't been escaping me. She'd been hunting opportunity. When the indictment was unsealed, the charges were staggering. Multiple counts of wire fraud. Coordinated enterprise activity. 18-year sentencing exposure if convicted. My role was clear. Witness. Architect. The man whose system revealed everything. At night, alone in the house she no longer wanted, I slept better than I had in years, not because I felt safe, but because I finally understood the truth. Love hadn't failed suddenly. It had been replaced quietly, deliberately, with greed. And the consequences were only beginning. The indictment dropped on a Thursday morning, quiet and procedural, like a document that had no idea it was detonating lives. I read it line by line at my kitchen table, the same table Lydia once joked we should replace because it didn't fit the new version of us. 12 pages. 21 counts. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Financial manipulation across state lines. The language was sterile, but the implications were brutal. Lydia was no longer just my wife who betrayed me. She was now defendant too in a federal case. By noon, her face was everywhere. Not the polished version she curated online, not the confident speaker from marketing conferences, but a grainy booking photo circulating through internal compliance channels. Hair pulled back hastily. No makeup. Eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in 22 years of marriage. I didn't feel satisfaction. What I felt was distance, like watching a storm move across a city you no longer live in. Grant called me that afternoon. "They're offering plea discussions," he said. "Not to you. To her." "Already?" I asked. "They have too much. The digital trail is airtight. She's trying to trade information for time." Information. I knew what that meant. Names. Systems. People who thought they were invisible. Over the next week, federal investigators pulled me in twice more. Not because they suspected me, but because my systems had become the backbone of their case. I walked them through everything again, slower this time. How thresholds worked. How anomalies stacked. How repeated, small violations formed patterns no human eye would catch without help. One investigator, Agent Carla Ruiz, leaned back in her chair after my explanation. "You didn't build this to catch your wife," she said. "No," I replied. "I built it because people lie when money is involved." She nodded. "Turns out you were right." The divorce proceedings resumed in parallel, a strange echo of the criminal case. Lydia's attorney, no longer the confident strategist she'd hired initially, filed a request to pause property division pending the outcome of the federal trial. Grant countered immediately. "She forfeits all claims," he said flatly in court. "Criminal conduct voids entitlement." The judge agreed. "House, mine. Retirement accounts, fully restored. Joint checking, split evenly, $1,500 to her, wired to a restricted account she could barely access. That was the last money she would ever receive from me." 2 weeks later, Lydia asked to speak with me. The request came through her public defender. No calls. No texts. In person, monitored. I considered refusing. I owed her nothing. But there was a part of me, the part that still believed in closure, that said I should hear her. The meeting took place in a small room at the Federal Detention Center. Concrete walls. A metal table. 2 chairs bolted to the floor. A guard position just outside the door. She looked older. Not aged by time, but by consequence. I didn't think it would end like this, she said quietly. I sat down, hands folded, saying nothing. I thought I was being smart, she continued. Careful. Like you. That's where you were wrong, I replied. I was careful to protect. You were careful to take. She swallowed. Marcus told me the systems were weak. That oversight was fragmented. He said finance people never look at marketing budgets. And you believed him, I said. Instead of believing your husband. Her eyes filled, but the tears didn't move me. I'd already cried for the marriage, months ago, without knowing it. They're offering me 10 years, she said. If I testify. 18 if I don't. That's not my decision, I said. I know. She hesitated. Do you hate me? I thought about it. About the life we'd built. The dinners. The vacations. The quiet mornings I'd believed were safe. No, I said finally. I don't hate you. I just don't recognize you. That hurt her more than anger ever could. The trial began in early spring. I testified on day 3. No drama. No raised voices. Just facts. Screenshots. Timelines. Code logic. I explained how Lydia's attempt to empty our retirement accounts triggered a compliance chain that exposed everything else. How the system treated her no differently than any other anomaly. The prosecutor asked, "Did you ever attempt to manipulate the system to target your wife?" "No," I replied. "The system doesn't know who she is. It only knows behavior." The jury understood that. On day 11, Marcus Hale took the stand. He folded within an hour. He described the scheme in full. How Lydia had tracked every transfer. How she'd created false vendors. How she'd timed withdrawals around reporting cycles. How she'd suggested targeting employees' personal assets to create exit capital. She was meticulous, he said. She kept spreadsheets. She knew exactly what she was doing. I didn't look at Lydia when he said that. I didn't need to. The recorded calls were played next. Her voice, calm and confident, discussing how Evan would never check her work accounts, because I respected boundaries. That was the moment the last illusion died. The verdict came on day 17. Guilty on all counts. Lydia didn't cry. She just stared straight ahead, as if the wall beyond the judge held answers she hadn't prepared for. Sentencing was scheduled 6 weeks later. In the meantime, I sold the house. It went for nearly $500,000, well above market expectations. I didn't feel sentimental packing up the rooms. I felt efficient. Done. I bought a smaller place near the coast. 1 story. Clean lines. No guest room. No shared history embedded in the walls. On the day of sentencing, I didn't attend. I read the outcome later. 18 years. Marcus received 9. Restitution ordered. Assets seized. Properties liquidated. Victims repaid. Justice, in its quiet, mathematical form. Months passed. Life reassembled itself slowly, carefully. I taught part-time at a local university, explaining fraud detection to students who thought financial crime was glamorous until I showed them the consequences. Occasionally, letters arrived from prison. Apologies. Reflections. Regret. I filed them away, unread. Not out of cruelty, but because I'd already moved on. The system kept running. So did I. Sentencing didn't feel like an ending. It felt like punctuation. A period placed at the end of a sentence that had already been finished in my mind. 18 years. That was the number everyone focused on. News articles. Legal summaries. Office whispers. But for me, the real sentence had been handed down months earlier, when I realized the woman I married had been running a parallel life built entirely on calculation, not love. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I was already 200 miles away, standing in the half-empty living room of my new house near the coast, watching movers carry in boxes labeled simply books, tools, files. No memories. No shared labels. Just what I needed to live forward. Grant called that afternoon. "It's done," he said. 18 years. No early parole eligibility under the federal guidelines. Full restitution ordered. "Thank you," I replied. "For what?" "For being precise," I said. "When everything else wasn't." After the call, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and let the quiet settle. Not relief. Not joy. Just stillness. The kind that comes after surviving something you never thought you'd have to. Over the next few weeks, life reassembled itself in practical ways. I finalized the sale of the old house. The funds cleared without incident, ironic, considering everything that had happened. I automated my investments again, adjusted thresholds, added layers I'd never imagined needing for personal use. At work, Orbis Union promoted me quietly. No announcement. No celebration. Just expanded authority and a new mandate, redesign corporate fraud detection frameworks using what my system had uncovered. 12 families were spared worse losses because of you, Michelle told me during a late meeting. That matters. It did. More than she knew. I began teaching 2 nights a week at a local university. Financial systems. Compliance ethics. Behavioral pattern analysis. I showed students real-world cases, anonymized, of course, and watched their expressions shift when they realized fraud wasn't committed by villains in movies, but by people who looked like neighbors, spouses, coworkers. One student asked me once, "How do you protect yourself from trusting the wrong person?" I didn't answer immediately. "You don't," I said finally. "You protect yourself from patterns. Trust is human. Systems are safeguards." That answer stayed with me. Letters continued to arrive from Lydia. The first few were frantic. Then remorseful. Then philosophical. She wrote about prison routines. About regret. About how she never meant to destroy everything. I didn't write back. Not because I was angry, but because the chapter was closed. Responding would have reopened something that no longer needed oxygen. One afternoon, nearly a year after the verdict, I received a call from Agent Ruiz. "We've concluded the final asset recovery," she said. "All victims compensated. Case closed." "Good," I replied. "There's one more thing," she added. "Your system is being adopted as a model framework. Nationally." I leaned back in my chair, absorbing that. A system I built to protect my household had become a standard to protect thousands. After the call, I walked outside and stood by the water, watching the tide roll in. The horizon was clean. Uncomplicated. I thought about the version of myself who received that first text. The one who sat at his desk, reading words that dismantled 22 years of marriage in seconds. I wished I could tell him something. Not that it would be okay. Not that justice would come. But that clarity would. That the truth, however brutal, was lighter to carry than a lie. 3 years later, my life looks nothing like the one I lost. It's quieter. Smaller. Intentional. I wake early. Coffee brewed automatically. Markets monitored silently in the background. No surprises. No emergencies. Sometimes I pass the old marketing firm building downtown. New signage. New people. Clean slate. 12 families rebuilt their lives with restitution funds. Students I taught now work in compliance roles across the country. And Lydia? Lydia exists somewhere beyond my orbit now, living with the consequences of choices she believed would never surface. I don't celebrate that. I accept it. Because justice doesn't require celebration. It requires acknowledgement. Looking back, I understand something I didn't before. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes quietly. In a text message. In a transfer confirmation. In a belief that no one is watching. But systems watch. Patterns expose. And truth doesn't need emotion to prevail, it only needs time. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with my story. And before you go, do me a small favor, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Stories like this reach more people when real listeners show up, and you never know who might need to hear that preparation, patience, and clarity can save them when trust fails. Thank you for listening.